In my brother's world, I wasn't really his sister. Not in the way sisters are supposed to be. I was the babysitter, the person they called when they wanted a night out or when something came up at the last minute. The one who could be counted on to show up without protest. I'd let myself in through their side door, greeted by the faint smell of reheated leftovers and the low hum of the dishwasher. Sometimes the kids were already in pajamas, their hair damp from rushed baths, and I'd settle them in with a bedtime story. Other nights, I was the one herding them up the stairs, brushing knots from their hair, tucking them in. Once they were asleep, the house felt hollow. I'd sit on their couch, folding a laundry, stacking tiny socks in neat pairs, while the dishwasher droned on in the background. I knew every creak in their floorboards, every flicker of the lamp that needed a new bulb. I knew more about their daily mess than most people know about their own homes. But none of that mattered. Not to them. In my brother's eyes, my presence wasn't a sign of love. It was a convenience, a free service. They never said, "Thank you," like it mattered. They never asked if I had eaten before I came over, even on nights I stayed late. Sometimes I'd drive home after midnight, my stomach aching with hunger, the fast food wrappers on the passenger seat, a silent reminder that my needs were always an afterthought. I told myself I didn't mind. That family was supposed to help each other. But there was a difference between helping and being used. It's strange how you can be in someone's home so often and still feel like an outsider. I noticed things. The chipped mug her coffee always sat in, the way his shoes were left by the back door in a hurry, the pile of unopened mail on the counter. But I was never part of the picture. I was like a ghost who kept the place running when no one else could. The kids loved me, and that was the only part that felt uncomplicated. They'd run into my arms, laughing, their small bodies warm and trusting. In those moments, I could almost forget that their parents saw me as an errand to cross off their list. But quiet truths have a way of seeping in, no matter how you try to ignore them. I started to notice the imbalance more clearly. How they'd ask for just one more night without offering to adjust their own schedules. How they'd send me home without even walking me to the door. It wasn't cruelty, it was something colder, indifference. And yet, I kept showing up. Maybe because saying no would mean admitting to myself that I wasn't valued the way I wanted to be. Or maybe because the kids didn't deserve to feel that absence, even if I did. At the time, I didn't realize that these quiet nights, the hum of the dishwasher, the lonely drives home, were the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would change my role in their lives entirely. It happened slowly, in ways that were easy to dismiss if you didn't want to see them. At first, it was just the faint sound of voices behind the kitchen door, not raised enough to be a fight, but sharp enough to make the air in the house feel different. I'd be in the living room with the kids, reading a story, or building a block tower, when I'd catch the muffled cadence of two people trying to keep their anger quiet. I told myself it was normal. Every couple argues, but there was something about the way their voices dropped when I moved closer, the way footsteps would scatter, like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. The kids noticed it too. They didn't say it outright, but their bodies spoke for them. The youngest started climbing into my lap the moment I walked in, pressing her face against my sweater as if trying to block out the world. The oldest would hover by the window, pretending to watch for birds or cars, but his eyes always drifted to the driveway, waiting, hoping. One night, I was helping the little one with her spelling words at the kitchen table. She was chewing on her pencil, struggling to remember if night had a silent K or not. Across from us, her brother sat with his backpack still on, eyes fixed on the front door like it might open if he stared hard enough. The clock above the fridge ticked past 7:30, then 8. He didn't move. "Want to start your math homework?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "Dad said he'd be home before dinner." I didn't know what to say. Dinner had been 2 hours ago. When my brother finally came through the door, his smile was thin and brittle, the kind you wear when you know it's too late to make it right. He ruffled his son's hair, kissed the top of his daughter's head, and disappeared upstairs without looking at me. No explanation, no acknowledgement that I'd been holding things together for hours. Moments like that kept stacking up. Missed dinners, tense silences, small lies the kids didn't quite believe. Sometimes my sister-in-law would slip out for errands after I arrived, her perfume lingering in the air long after the door closed. Other times, my brother would call me mid-afternoon, his voice light and casual. "Hey, could you swing by tonight? We've got plans." Plans that were never explained. I started to feel like I was living in the in-between of their marriage, filling the gaps when they didn't want to be in the same room, absorbing the overflow of their absence so the kids wouldn't drown in it. But those gaps were widening. One Saturday, I arrived to find the living room half cleaned, toys swept into a pile in the corner. The kids were dressed but quiet, sitting side by side on the couch. My sister-in-law was in the kitchen, pacing, her voice low into the phone. My brother wasn't home. Neither of them looked surprised to see me, which told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't here because of some last-minute change of plans. I was here because they both needed me to be. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't my business, that whatever was happening between them had nothing to do with me. But that was the problem. It wasn't just between them. It was in the way the kids held their breath when voices rose. It was in the way bedtime stories were interrupted by the slam of a door. I could feel it. The perfect family I'd been helping to keep polished for years was splintering. And without meaning to, I was standing in the cracks, holding pieces neither of them seemed willing to keep from breaking. It was close to midnight when my phone rang. I remember staring at the screen, my brother's name glowing in the dark, and feeling that quiet jolt in my chest. The kind that tells you this isn't a social call. His voice was flat. No urgency, no panic, just empty. "Can you come over? It's an emergency." I didn't ask questions. I just pulled on a sweater, grabbed my keys, and drove. The streets were almost deserted, the kind of stillness that makes every stoplight feel like it's holding its breath. When I walked in, the house was wrong. Not messy, chaotic. A coat tossed halfway across the stairs, a shattered mug on the kitchen floor, the faint smell of something burnt in the air. My sister-in-law was gone. My brother sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, saying nothing. The kids were in their pajamas, wide-eyed and silent, like they'd been told not to move. The youngest ran to me the moment she saw me, wrapping her arms around my legs so tightly I almost stumbled. The oldest just stood there, arms crossed over his chest, watching me like I might have the answers he'd been waiting for all night. What happened? I asked my brother. He didn't look up. She left? That was all I got. No explanation, no plan, just that. I got the kids settled, made them some toast even though it was almost 1 in the morning, and sat with them until their breathing softened into sleep. I didn't want them to wake up in the middle of the night and find the house still humming with whatever had just happened. I ended up on the couch, the youngest curled beside me like she used to when she was a toddler. Her small hand clung to my sweater, even in sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet tick of the clock in the hallway. My brother stayed in the kitchen for a while, the sound of ice clinking in a glass, then silence. I don't know when he went upstairs. The next morning, I made breakfast. My brother was gone. No note, no text. Just gone. That day turned into another and another. I picked the kids up from school, packed their lunches, sat through a parent-teacher meeting about missed homework. Every day I told myself this was temporary, that he'd come back and take over. But when he did show up, it was always the same. A shrug, a vague excuse, the smell of beer on his breath. "You're a lifesaver," he'd say, like I just covered one evening for him, not the entire week. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't babysitting anymore. I wasn't the stand-in until the real parents got home. I was the one making sure they ate, the one they called from school when someone got sick, the one who knew which stuffed animal the youngest needed to fall asleep. I was the constant. But to him, I was still just helping out. The realization settled in like a cold draft. No matter how much I did, no matter how many pieces I held together, he would never see me as more than the person who filled in when he couldn't or wouldn't show up. Still, I stayed. For the kids, for their routines, for the small stability I could give them in the middle of whatever storm their parents had decided to weather in separate rooms. Looking back, I think that night was the real turning point. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was the moment I stopped believing that someone else was coming to take responsibility. It was the moment I understood, quietly, without saying it out loud, that if I didn't hold this together, no one would. Weeks blurred together in a way that only happens when you're running on autopilot. I kept their fridge stocked, making sure the cereal they liked was on the shelf and the yogurt they'd eat without complaint was in the drawer. I learned the art of folding laundry while helping with math homework, of answering school emails during the 10 minutes between dinner cleanup and bedtime stories. When the youngest fell off the playground swing and broke her wrist, it was my name the school nurse called. I left work, sat in the ER with her small hand resting in mine, and signed the consent forms my brother should have been there for. He arrived hours later, smelling faintly of cologne, thanking me like I'd just run an errand for him. Parent-teacher meetings became routine. Grocery trips, doctor's appointments, permission slips, all mine to handle. And each time he'd say something like, "You're amazing. I don't know how I'd manage without you." But it was never about acknowledging what I was actually doing. It was a way to avoid taking responsibility. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night. I was putting dishes away when I heard him in the other room talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. His voice just carried. "Yeah, she's fine watching them," he said, a short laugh in his voice. "She doesn't have a life anyway. It's no big deal." I froze. My hand tightened around a plate until I thought it might crack. No life, no big deal. It wasn't the first time he'd taken me for granted, but this was different. This wasn't thoughtlessness. It was dismissal. It was the truth of how he saw me, spoken so casually it felt like it had always been there, just under the surface. I didn't say anything. I put the plate in the cabinet, dried my hands, and finished the evening like nothing had happened. But something in me had shifted. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and started writing. Dates, times. Every time he missed pickup, every late night he didn't come home, every excuse that didn't match the reality. I wrote down the things the kids said in passing, the nights they cried, the mornings they skipped breakfast because there was nothing in the fridge before I came over. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew why I was doing it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about not being caught unprepared when this reached a breaking point. The next morning, I kept my tone light as I made their lunches, listening to the kids chatter about a field trip. My brother breezed in, grabbed a coffee, and left without looking at me. He had no idea that something had changed, that the sister who always said yes had started keeping track. I was no longer just coping. I was collecting proof, and deep down, I think I already knew where it would lead. It started with a phone call from the school. The teacher's voice was gentle, but the words still landed heavy. "We've noticed some concerns, and we've filed a report." My stomach sank. I'd heard enough stories to know what that meant. Social services. For the rest of the day, I moved like my body was made of glass. I couldn't stop imagining the kids being taken away from me too, shuffled into a stranger's home, losing what little stability they had left. When the knock finally came, I felt my hands go cold. The woman standing at the door introduced herself as a social worker. Her tone was calm, her eyes steady, and somehow that made it worse. Like she was used to walking into messy situations and picking through the pieces. We sat at the kitchen table. She asked questions, not just about the kids, but about me. How long I'd been caring for them. What my days looked like. Who handled their medical appointments, their school needs, their meals. Every answer I gave felt like it was building a case, but I didn't know for what. And then she said it. "Have you considered legal guardianship?" The words stopped me. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a suggestion layered with judgment. It was acknowledgement that I was already doing the job, that in every way that mattered, I'd been parenting them for months. I didn't answer right away. The guilt rose fast, as if thinking about custody was some kind of betrayal, as if it meant giving up on my brother entirely. But the other part of me, the one that had been quietly documenting missed pickups and empty cupboards, knew the truth. I couldn't keep watching him fail them, hoping he'd one day wake up and be the father they needed. Before she left, the social worker slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was information about the process, forms, steps, what to expect. I kept my hands in my lap, not touching it. I wasn't ready to make that move. Not yet. After she left, I made tea and just sat there, staring at the folder like it might open on its own. The kitchen was too quiet. The only sound the faint hum of the fridge. The paperwork stayed on the table for days, untouched but never out of sight. Every time I walked past, I felt the weight of it, heavier than the paper should allow. At night, when the kids were asleep, I'd catch myself imagining what life would look like if I took that step, not just in theory, but in reality. A life where their needs came first, where they wouldn't have to watch the door every night, waiting for someone who might not come. The guilt was still there, sharp and stubborn. But alongside it, something steadier was growing, a quiet resolve. I didn't know when I'd make the decision, but I knew this. The folder wasn't going back in a drawer. The courthouse steps feel heavier than they should. Each one seems to sink a little deeper under my weight, as if the building itself knows why I'm here. The air is cold enough to sting my face, and I pull my coat tighter around me, but the chill in my chest has nothing to do with weather. I arrive early. Too early. The waiting room smells faintly of coffee and disinfectant. I sit in a hard plastic chair, the kind that forces your back straight, and watch the second hand on the clock stutter forward. My hands won't stay still. I keep folding them together, then apart, then together again. When my brother finally walks in, it's like a gust of wind I wasn't ready for. He's late. His hair is uncombed, his shirt half tucked, the knot in his tie hanging low like it gave up halfway. He doesn't look nervous. He looks annoyed, as if this entire morning is just one more thing keeping him from something better. He doesn't sit next to me. The bailiff calls our names. The courtroom is colder than the hallway, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off wood-paneled walls. I glance toward the waiting area where the kids are sitting with a family friend. They don't see me. They're busy with coloring books. But just knowing they're there steadies me. The judge sits high above us, framed by shelves of thick, leather-bound law books. When the social worker speaks, her voice is steady, measured. She doesn't look at me while she talks. She doesn't have to. She lays out the facts like a map. The nights I stayed over because my brother didn't come home, the school mornings when there was no breakfast, the medical forms signed by me because no one else showed up. Every word she says is something I've lived. Every sentence is a moment I remember. When it's my turn, I stand. My knees feel like they've forgotten how to hold me up, but my voice, surprisingly, doesn't shake. I speak quietly because this isn't a performance. I talk about the night the youngest cried herself to sleep in my arms, the morning the oldest almost missed school because no one could find clean clothes, the times they told me they were hungry and I pretended not to notice my own dinner shrinking on the plate so they could have more. I feel my brother's glare burning into the side of my face, but I don't look at him. The judge doesn't interrupt. She just watches me, her pen still, her eyes focused in a way that feels like she's weighing something far heavier than words. When I finish, there's a silence that stretches long enough for my pulse to find a rhythm again. The judge speaks, but I don't hear every word. Only fragments. Temporary custody. Best interest of the children. Review in 6 months. My chest tightens, not from fear, but from the realization that something irreversible has just happened. My brother pushes back from the table hard enough that his chair scrapes across the floor. He doesn't look at me as he leaves. I stay seated for a moment longer. My palms are damp, my heart still pounding. The social worker leans toward me and says, "You did the right thing." I nod, but I can't answer. I'm not sure if I'm relieved or just exhausted. When I step outside, the sky is still gray. The cold bites at my cheeks again, but now it feels different. Lighter, somehow. There's still a long road ahead. A review, more hearings, more paperwork. But for the first time, I'm not just reacting to his choices. I'm making my own. It's been months since the courtroom. The sharp edges of those days have dulled, but the outlines remain. Not painful, just clear. The kids live here now, in a home that feels lived in, not just occupied. Their shoes piled by the door in mismatched rows. Homework sheets and crayon drawings cover the fridge. On Saturday mornings, we make pancakes that never come out perfectly round, and no one cares. My brother sends the rent payments on time. They arrive in crisp envelopes, without notes or calls. I cash them without thought, the same way you'd pay a utility bill. Necessary, transactional, stripped of meaning. Once, I would have searched for warmth in those gestures, twisting them into proof that I mattered. Now I see them for exactly what they are. Numbers on a page, nothing more. He doesn't visit often. When he does, it feels like he's passing through a hotel lobby, eyes scanning for the exit. I used to brace myself before those visits, hoping he'd notice the kids' artwork, the way they laugh more now, the steadiness in their eyes. But I've stopped trying to make him see. My life isn't a presentation for his approval anymore. Evenings are our own now. We have small rituals, hot chocolate on rainy nights, card games where the youngest always wins, even when he doesn't. The house hums with a quiet warmth. Not loud or celebratory, but steady, dependable. The kids don't ask anymore if their dad is coming to pick them up. They just ask what's for dinner. Sometimes I think about that version of me who kept saying yes. Yes to the late night babysitting. Yes to the last minute calls. Yes to being invisible because it felt safer than causing conflict. I want to take her by the shoulders and tell her, "You were allowed to want more. You were allowed to stop." This isn't a happy ending in the fairy tale sense. There's no perfect resolution, no sweeping apology that makes everything whole. But it is an ending, my ending, one where I stand in my own home with my own choices and no longer measure my worth by how much I can endure for someone else. Family, I have learned, isn't about titles or bloodlines. It's about showing up every single day in the small, ordinary moments. It's about being there when the homework is hard, when the tears are sudden, when the laughter comes out of nowhere. It's about keeping the lights on, both in the rooms and in the hearts of the people who depend on you. And that's what I do now, quietly, without needing thanks. Not for him, but for them. And finally, for me.